Hey everybody, it is June 5th, 2025, and welcome to a brand new episode of Frank About Health. Today it's kind of a mini reunion while at the same time a very new and innovative show. It is two individuals from the class of 1984 from Brooklyn Technical High School, my alma mater. And basically, if you remember, David Yang was with me on Frank About Health several weeks ago promoting our I guess you could say our homecoming, but the thing is that it was a tribute to an institution that I have found even more relevant today, in my case 40 years later, when it comes to healthcare and healthcare technology and innovation. Something I didn't know back then, but having that STEM education definitely did serve me well years later. Now, that being said, we've had Dr. Marshall Runge on four separate episodes promoting his book, The Great Healthcare Disruption. Two of those episodes, David Yang was also very instrumental in discussing about the book and about how there's disruption in many levels, including the way that our country is going through man-made disruptions of sorts. However, we're not going to spend this episode talking about disruption from a negative angle. We're going to talk about how it provides us to get on our entrepreneurial mindset, especially if we have our own health concerns that we want to get all the information on, and look at disruption as an opportunity for innovation. And that being said, today's special guest, Mark Filerman, who's from Boston, is working for a very well known incubator in the area and a hub that looks at healthcare technologies that would be able to come up with better solutions or better treatment protocols, probably even better handheld technologies similar to the ones that you, David, have developed at your company. Now, the thing that we are going to do with this particular episode is we will have a discussion, as we normally do, especially in segment two. But in segment three, Mark is going to give us a little mini webinar of sorts to show how you take disruptive issues in healthcare. And if you have the mindset, like I know he does, and like I've been trying to branch out with Marshall Runge, we're going to learn what we do about it. So, that all being said, the only disclaimer I can provide is this is an opportunity to use Frank About Health to learn. These are not the views of TalkRadio.nyc or of this show, Frank About Health, but it is an open discussion that I look forward to having with both David and Mark. Now, David, I'll let you do the honor of introducing Mark's background and history and everything else because I know that both of you were in the same class together, and it was thanks to you that we had the chance to meet this week.
I would like to introduce Mark. I've known Mark for many years, almost as long as I've known my wife. We both started in Brooklyn Technical High School way back in the 1980. Um, Over the last year or so, I've had time, so I've been viewing just different people's LinkedIn profiles. And Mark's profile really caught my attention because of the work that he's doing. He's really, I believe, on the cutting edge of taking great ideas and trying to get them from the brain to the bedside. I think Mark's got a better term for that.
Yes.
So I reached out to him a couple of weeks ago, and he was same Mark, very open, very happy person. And so, Mark, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about yourself? But I'm so glad and thankful, Mark, that you were able to take time out
Yes.
for this.
Well, it's really my pleasure. Thanks so much, Dave, for that introduction, and Frank, thank you. Very honored to be on the show today because it's so important to be discussing health, our own health, our role in our own health, our
Yes.
role in the adoption of new technologies, et cetera. So I think we'll have an opportunity to get into that discussion a little bit more.
Absolutely.
To add a little color on Dave's introduction. So yes, I'm a proud Brooklyn Tech graduate from 1984.
Mhm.
Hard to say, but I've spent, after a couple of engineering degrees here in the Boston area, spent 35 years or so in health tech. Mostly in large companies focusing on medical imaging, medical diagnostic imaging across modalities,
Mhm.
CT, MR, ultrasound, that and the like.
Yes.
Operating theater devices, so the bits and pieces that get applied to the patient or surround the patient or enable the patient's innards to be viewed during an operation,
Hmm.
or surgical note reporting. So I spent a fair amount of time in and around software and the
Hmm.
integration of software technologies to help electronic health records and help
I,
make information available to the doctor when they need it.
I'm
Right.
laughing because Mark, you're naming your own poison because I think that there's a show around the AI part of it. But please keep going.
Yeah, AI. So it's funny you bring up AI. So I did graduate work at MIT in the AI lab back in the late 80s, where I'm fond of saying it was difficult to spell AI. But I will say that that whole movement and many of the people, not myself, were really instrumental in laying the groundwork for everything that we have today.
Well, that being said, I just have one question. I mean, I know for the 80s, for me, I was in the Math Science Institute at Brooklyn Tech, and we were learning Pascal programming and basic programming and
Yep.
how to use the IBM PC. Remember that dinosaur?
Mhm.
Meanwhile, the thing is that AI back then would not have been what it is today, whether it's ChatGPT or Alexa devices through, your living room or whatever. What
Right.
would you classify was the AI hot
Yeah.
topic of the day?
So the thing, one of the things, and my lens on it was really trying to embed smart systems into products to make those products smarter. So there was this convergence of software and hardware, so mechanical hardware, electronic hardware,
Hmm.
to to make like a classic example that I remember from 40 years ago was irons that if they were upright and on, they didn't turn off, and except after a long period of time. But
Right.
if they were down with the hot surface down and not moving for a very short period of time, they would switch
Immediately
off.
turned off.
Right.
Nice.
And so there was this convergence of software and 3D modeling for product design. So virtual parts and the whole CAD system, computer aided design systems that were enabling uh, innovative design and the design of more complex products. So AI
Mm.
was all about expert systems and smart products, at least in robotics. There were a number of thrusts, but
If I could
nothing
comment,
like we have today. Of
if I could comment,
course.
I am in the medical device industry, and we have instruments that do, literally thousands of tests per hour.
Mhm.
So if an instrument goes down, then thousands of patients are disrupted. They don't get their results back. So having anticipating when the machine is going to go down is critical to healthcare. And we're reaching the point where in 2025, we will now know if David Yang is about to hit a problem and he's going to go down
Hey,
based on the same idea, but now it's personalized to Frank, Mark,
right.
Jess. Yeah.
Yes.
So one of the most exciting areas is applying AI to look at extremely large data sets over a
Yes.
long period of time and improve population health and
Yes.
then in individuals' health, and to
Yes.
use biomarkers to make predictive comments or predictions
Yes.
about how an individual should behave, what they should do, what they shouldn't do, what they should eat, what they shouldn't eat. And there's this wonderful convergence now of patient empowerment
Hmm.
and adoption of innovation
Yes.
that I'm still optimistic that we're going to see people not only living longer but living better,
Yes.
because
Yes.
we've done a fantastic job about making people live longer.
Hmm.
But my 95-year-old mother who's bedridden with Alzheimer's and has been for a decade.
Wow.
She's not living better. She's certainly living longer.
Well, the thing is that at least she's living longer to wait for whatever possible solutions can help mitigate it. But I know it's the age issue. I'm in a situation similar to you, but the difference is my cousin is 65 going on 66.
Right. So
And so I don't know based on the circumstances. I'm not sure how long she's going to be here. And that is an ongoing, I wouldn't call it a trauma, but it's an ongoing problem for me. Yet, what I have learned is to accept that because of AI and other innovations that are out there, there's hope.
yes,
Something that I gather Alzheimer or whether it's family members or patients with Alzheimer's a decade ago, probably didn't have much hope. So
that's
now
right.
there's a little bit more, right?
It's been cool because after my work in large med device and software companies, these multinational companies,
Hmm.
I I got bitten by the entrepreneurial bug at an orthopedics company, and was pretty instrumental by the grace of God, um, to have been a part of literally building this business from the ground up.
Yes.
Uh, and so I quit about 10 years ago, actually 2012, 2013, and I've been entrepreneurial ever since, and squarely on the side of innovation, and have learned viscerally through the two startups that I've founded
Yes.
the challenges of innovation adoption and the importance of some themes that we will talk about later during the hour. But
Awesome. I
but
appreciate
it's a
that.
lovely journey. So
Well, at the same time, like what David and I have been talking about, especially on our shows involving Marshall Runge, is that we're learning that with the way AI has developed over time, and not to mention that when you are dealing with disruption, you almost have to be entrepreneurial to keep focused on your life while the rest of society is all fragmented with information or misinformation and things like that. So is it safe to say before we go to our first break that health tech or even um, health disruption is an entrepreneurial mission that we all have to eventually face?
I would
We don't learn
concur
that in school. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out, is that what you've discovered through your own experience?
absolutely. And in innovation translation, which we'll talk about a little bit,
Yes.
is inherently an entrepreneurial endeavor. You kind of have to be a little wacky, or at least irrationally persistent,
Yeah,
um,
good.
in your belief that somehow you, person, individual, can create capital I impact
Yes.
and help patients, which is not always easy. But yes, I would totally concur. And AI
Good.
can
So I
be
know I'm on the right path. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned right here on Frank About Health as we are managing healthcare disruption through innovation with David Yang and Mark Filerman. We will be back in a few.
Are you a conscious co creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on TalkRadio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Broncu, host of The Hard Skills on TalkRadio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on TalkRadio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. For all of you watching right now, either on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitch, if you have any questions during the next half hour, especially as Mark will show us a presentation later on, please feel free to write in the chat boxes, and we are here to answer those questions for you live. At the same time, what you've just had is an overview that healthcare, when we are dealing with disruption or if we're dealing with chronic illness, you have to take the bull by the horns and control your ship to solutions, your ship to finding out different inventions that may or may not exist that you could come up with. We all went through COVID. That was a big incubator of sorts. So that being said, I would dub segment two as I already put it down here and I can't remember it. Development of the ecosystem, because that is essentially what we all have to do for ourselves, for our loved ones, and I guess as a society, we have to do it more than ever. So, that being said, Mark, let's start with you. Or maybe David, do you want to define ecosystem? Because I know we were the ones that brainstormed that was the whole discussion point that we wanted to bring out on this show.
Yeah, I mean, the ecosystem is basically the collection of all the stakeholders required to take an idea in disrupting healthcare to the bedside.
Yes.
And so I've seen many great ideas that have died on the vine because that's all it was a great idea. Um, Basically, you need to have a medical need, a clinical need,
Right.
and you have to have the clinicians buy in. If this is a test, you have to get the buy in of the laboratories that are going to do the test,
Mm-hmm.
the CFOs who are responsible for making sure that everyone, earns a living around that.
Yes.
Um, and so it's not just the idea, but it's really all the stakeholders. I'm going to let Mark speak. I'm also going to close my window because there's some construction going on.
Sure.
So yeah, go ahead, Mark. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Dave, thanks for that. I completely agree that when you define ecosystem sort of in the context of health tech, healthcare disruption, it is really that constellation of all of the different players or actors that have an interest
Yes.
in some sort of innovation or play a role in the adoption of that innovation. What
Yes.
is very interesting to me is the fact that usually in ecosystem maps, the patient is not explicitly listed, and that's with good reason and sort of bad reason. The good the good reason or the explanation is that typically the patient is not the one involved in developing or adopting or buying or using a piece of medical equipment like a big MRI system, right? The patient kind of walks in after the doctor refers the patient to go to an MRI, but
Yes.
they're not. So they're involved, but
Yes.
but they're not involved in the sort of adoption of that innovation. So
Right.
as we think about innovation, there are multiple very important people, and I'll just use Boston, New York, Minneapolis, Chicago, Northern California, and Southern California, actually, Houston. There are notable places of hardcore development. Tennessee, also with Vanderbilt, where there is this critical mass of problem identifiers, the clinicians that live and deal with problems of patients or workflow or systems every day.
Mm-hmm.
Problem solvers, so engineers, scientists, doctors, researchers that can develop solutions to these problems that the clinicians or hospital administrators identify,
Mm-hmm.
and entrepreneurs.
Yes.
And many times, and I have direct experience with this.
Mm-hmm.
We, as innovators and disruptors, believe wrongly that it is enough to have a problem identifier and a problem solver and money.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not the way that innovation translates. As Dave was saying, from brain to bedside. I love that. I was thinking a different B, from bench to bedside, but there's lots of B's that are all applicable. And I actually like your framework better.
I was trying to remember what your first B was. So,
but it's really like innovation is your B, right? Innovation is the stuff that's in the brain that somebody thinks about. But
Mm-hmm.
innovation is not impact. Innovation requires translation. So the commercialization of innovation is translation, right? So having the innovation, publishing a paper, pumping out PhDs, great, but to make patient capital I impact, it has to be out in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the entrepreneur comes in. That person takes the problem can readily identify. Oh, that's a good problem, and wow, you have a fantastic solution, and I'm going to come in and I am going to drive this program, this venture forward. And I'm going to go out and I'm going to use my grit, and I'm going to use my muscle, and I'm going to use my contacts, and I'm going to not get any sleep, and I'm going to get funding from wherever I can to try to take this innovation and translate it into the world. So the core elements are problem identifiers, problem solvers, entrepreneurs, and typically these surround academia, and then you sprinkle on some money, some government incentives, and then you have an ecosystem.
Well, it's kind of interesting because what about, never mind COVID, that was an anomaly unto itself. But when you have someone like myself who's been living my life with epilepsy, first seizure at Brooklyn Tech, March 1984, your year. The point of the matter is that I had no idea why I was given that until I realized it became one of the defining marks of my career post the music industry. Now, that being said, I now use epilepsy as, I guess you could say, a badge of honor or as my leverage in order for me to talk about healthcare. This podcast was born on that alone. So, my question to you, based on everything you've just said, is that even though the patient is not normally looked at as part of the participants in the ecosystem, if they have a unique illness or if they're bringing to the table something that is unexplainable, isn't that their differential advantage? Isn't that where they
Yes.
become the prototype of sorts?
So I love, so thank you for raising that, because the advocate, the champion
Mm-hmm.
of a patient advocate, a patient champion,
Yes.
can move mountains.
Mm.
I can literally move mountains because of that person's raising awareness of a specific illness, a specific condition that they, because of their actions, bring to the attention of the ecosystem and coalesce the problem solvers, the money, the structure, the frameworks, the non-dilutive funding initiatives from a state or a city or a local government. So a strong patient advocate can coalesce other patients and literally create a movement to raise visibility of a condition, which catches the eye of the innovators and like, wow, and I'm trying not to curse. Being from New York, it's so hard not to curse, particularly when I get excited about things. But it's so important to have that. So there's this wonderful two sides of the coin. You've got the patients on one side is sort of the innovation ecosystem. And that's actually a bad analogy. I would say that the motivation for the ecosystem, the motivation for everything in the aforementioned ecosystem is actually the patient, right? Whether they're specifically involved in that translation or not.
Yes.
They are the core, right? Helping Frank live the life that Frank wants to live, and giving Frank the tools to do that in the way that Frank wants to do that.
Yes.
It's an incredibly important motivator.
I guess the movement becomes even more compelling if the patient is the advocate, is the entrepreneur, and therefore brings everything to the table. But of course, they can't do it alone. No entrepreneur can do anything alone. They need the right team.
So, in fact, there are many, many instances of entrepreneurs with a certain condition that say, you know what, I've been suffering and no solutions are out there. I'm going to do it myself. And off they go to be an entrepreneur. And
Exactly.
maybe having no knowledge of entrepreneurship, not being a problem solver necessarily by training, but because of grit and motivation, they create a company to solve that problem. I've worked with countless companies where that has been the case, and they make fantastic engineers.
That is amazing. That is amazing. So then would it be also safe to say that part of the disruption that Marshall has talked about in his book, and that David and I were assessing throughout the last month or so, is that what is disrupted is the homeostatic state, is the norm.
Yes.
When we are in the chaos and that entrepreneur takes over, as you said, that actually is not disruption. It's the norm for them, but it is a positive form of disruption, right? Would that be the best way to differentiate?
Yeah, I would say so. That state of inherent discontent is a hallmark of entrepreneurs.
Yes. Yes.
Wouldn't you say, Dave?
No, that's right. And I was just thinking of another story where I actually went to a core testing lab in a hospital, and one of the standard work in that core hospital lab is that they have to centrifuge blood for reasons that I don't want to get into. But there's a step where you have to centrifuge blood. The nurse practitioner, whoever, has to go there and sit in front of this machine for 5 minutes before it can go onto the instrument. And I told her, well, what if I told you didn't have to do that? And she got very angry. She said, look, David, I've been doing this job for 30 years. You have to do this. Everyone always has to do this. And what I pointed out is that what you need is the product. That step that you having to do it, there could be a better way. And I explained to her a better way. Then her whole demeanor changed, which is, you mean I don't have to do this 5-minute step anymore? It can just go from the body to the instrument, and I don't have to babysit it. Yada. Then her entire demeanor changed because she was accepting of the current states.
Right.
And, and when you think about the current state is just that, but the future state doesn't have to look like the current state.
So I love that example, right? So one of the things that entrepreneurs realize inherently is that everything around us is a construct that was made by somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And I can unmake it.
Yep.
I can improve it. I can do that. I can self-actualize.
Yes.
And I can present to the norm, to the status quo, a different way of doing something, which may meet with massive resistance.
Yes.
Initially, but as soon as they say, wait a minute, you are making my life easier or better, or you're improving patient care, or you're keeping the same efficacy but reducing the side effects, or you're shortening the recovery time, or you're increasing the mean time between seizures, or you're reducing the amplitude of the seizure, whatever it is, like, okay, now I'm really interested.
Right.
Please, Dave, please keep talking.
Yeah.
Well, we
And
have
Mark,
to take our second break right now. I did want to say, however, that what you've just shown is that the healthcare disruptor that most people should get pulled towards is the visionary entrepreneur. All right. That all being said, we're now going to, in segment three, have a little bit of a webinar slash lecture from Mark Filerman, but I did want to say that we will be focused on the path to patient-centered care, correct? That's the title that we gave it?
Mm.
Or, okay. That
we'll
all being
figure.
said, please, I'm like literally looking at,
Yes.
yeah,
Path to
the patient care pathway.
patient.
Okay. All right, everybody, stay tuned. We'll be back in a few.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on TalkRadio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on TalkRadio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Linda Marsanico. The A Train to Sedona is a memoir about my journey to love and compassion. It's also the name of my new broadcast on Wednesdays at 12 noon. When we are spiritual, we embrace possibilities and ideas, which strengthen our mind, body, spirit, health, and wisdom. On the A Train to Sedona broadcast, I plan to interview guests who embrace these expansive practices. Join us on Wednesdays at 12 noon on Talk Radio New York City.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. The patient. Oh, wow. Why can't I get it right? Why don't you say it, Mark? Because I know I love your energy when it comes to this topic. So you just say it like it's spelled it out.
Patient care pathways, right?
Yes.
Or the patient journey.
The
and
patient
why,
journey.
yes,
Yes.
and why this is so important to understand
Yes.
in translation. So so I think I will be able to show some slides here. But before I do so, we were talking about disruption. We're talking
Yes.
about the adoption of innovation, the translation of innovation, and the difficulties that entrepreneurs can encounter when they are trying to get their innovation adopted. And there's so many different ways to fail, but notably, one of the most important things to understand, and it's directly related to the patient care pathway and to the adoption of innovation, is that it is absolutely positively critical for startups to have well-defined problem statements. And actually, Frank, it's funny. This can sometimes be a problem for patient entrepreneurs because they live these problems ubiquitously, and the problems with certain conditions affect multiple areas of a patient's life, that it can be difficult to really understand, well, what problem am I actually trying to solve? And the problems that clinicians face are different than the life of the patient. And
Yes,
this is where that split between the patient being involved in the ecosystem and the translation of innovation and the doctor really manifests, because the doctor or the hospital or the administrator or the chief or the surgeon advocate is the person that's going to pay for a solution to a problem. And if you, as an entrepreneur, don't frame that problem correctly, they're not going to understand it. They may feel like I don't own that problem. I'm sort of tangentially related to it, but I don't own that problem. And the patient's like, wait a minute, hold on, you entrepreneur and you clinician, you guys talk to one another because I'm suffering, and all of that's true. But the way that miscommunication can be clarified is to have very well-defined problem statements. And this, having a well-defined problem statement, is absolutely, positively critical, because it frames the whole company and allows the customer, the partner, the investor to really understand what is motivating that entrepreneur, what is motivating that founding team, and allows me as a funder, as an angel investor, to accept the value that you're bringing through that innovation. Because I understand the problem and I agree that it's actually a big problem. It's not just a problem that Frank has, that Mark has. This is actually a problem that many patients have. And this is where the power of that patient advocate can be critical, because that patient advocate can coalesce everybody, drive the innovation, and having a well-defined problem statement can tie right back to the value that in innovation it is delivering. But there's depth and there's nuance and heterogeneity ubiquitously in our healthcare system, which is a real problem and a real hurdle for adoption. And Dave, I know you've seen this on the corporate side. I've seen it on the corporate and on the startup side, and having this real depth and understanding of the problem is critical.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I can't emphasize that more. A stroke patient, a potential stroke patient, if you're in an urban area, has a very different patient care pathway than a rural. If you get a stroke in Boston, New York, LA, you probably will go to a stroke center right away. If you're in a rural setting and you're a suspected stroke, you may go to the community hospital. They may figure out that you have the stroke, but they can't do anything about it. So then they're going to put you back in an ambulance and send you on another journey to the stroke center, which could be an hour and a half away. So the nuance, the depth, the geographical characteristics of healthcare, something in rural Georgia that I spent some time studying is very different than, downtown, Boston.
Yeah. And so having a clear understanding of that patient journey, and what we mean by that, and what Dave was referring to in the stroke situation is what happens to that patient from essentially the time of symptoms to treatment to monitoring, and maybe even so there's sort of three phases, right? Diagnosis, which is usually coincident with symptoms, treatment, and then monitoring. And to be able to really understand how a specific type of patient with a specific instance of a disease or condition is going to be diagnosed, treated, and monitored can really affect where that entrepreneur and where that startup wants to focus their attention. Because there's a huge need in healthcare deserts, which are many times correlated with ruralness, not always. For stroke patients versus in Boston. And it's perfectly acceptable to say, look, I have designed this thing as a solution, right? Or I am looking to commercialize this thing through my startup, and my target customer, my intended user buyer, are the people in these types of ecosystems. So the number of stroke patients, or the number of strokes that happens in the United States every year, is an interesting number, but not necessarily the problem statement. And that may or may not actually guide what you're doing. What a segue. So these contextual statements, right, about rates of cancer, or rates, and cancer is a great one because it's not that it's great, but it's a great example for what we're talking about. These contexts, these are not problem statements, and we many times confuse the fact that a certain cancer rate or a certain number of strokes that happen equals, hey, we have this huge value proposition, when in fact the way innovation happens is that, yeah, we're gonna further refine our understanding of the problem based upon our understanding of the patient journey in rural Georgia and that patient's care pathway, and use that to guide the development of the product to solve that specific problem by providing this specific value proposition. And these things are critical. So I love to say euphemistically that problem statements have to suck. Your problem statement as an engineer has to suck. It has to be specific, understandable, and compelling. SUC has to suck. So I love
Excellent.
So,
I have an interesting question though, that I don't know if it's a marketing oriented question, but when you were talking about the rural cases of stroke victims, where they have more delay in treatment because of their journey and the location and whether the resources are available or not, does it then therefore tell the entrepreneur that they have to segment their solution to the problem
Absolutely.
by having more preventative
Absolutely.
care measures for
absolutely.
those
So,
people? Okay.
so part of specific, the S in suck is like specific, and that specific is based upon a segmentation. And so I do a little angel investing in the Boston area, right? And so talk to a lot of entrepreneurs. And when it becomes very clear that they have not segmented or don't understand the segmentation of their users and their buyers and their ecosystem, that's like an automatic out, because one of the things that I'm looking for is deep expertise in the understanding of the problem, understanding of the patient journey and the nuances, understanding of the different care pathways and where their kit can best be applied in a foothold market, and how that foothold market can be broadened.
Awesome.
So if I could just quickly add, so imagine that you had a stroke test, right? So there are 1 million strokes in the US back in 2019, as I recall. That's the total market. But you may want to focus on the rural, because the people in the city, they're going to go to the stroke center no matter what. So you don't need a stroke test for that, but maybe you need a stroke test that goes in an ambulance. And if you do the math, maybe 400,000 strokes or potential strokes in the US are in the rural setting. So the total market is about 1 million, but the total addressable market for your product is 400,000. So now you have a better idea as to really how much, financial return you could make, how many customers that you could address, because you've segmented it, according to whatever the right characteristics are.
And what's so cool about this is that it may be that there are only 400,000, not the million, but the magnitude or the amplitude of the problem is so much greater for this segment of patients that okay, the adoption hurdles are significantly less, and people will use that test every day.
Yep.
Wow.
Oh,
Well, we're about to take our final break, but I was just going to make, I hope this is appropriate, the joke that came to my mind. It sounds like that certain entrepreneurs in that particular instance, they don't suck, they get stuck.
I love it.
So,
I'll use that and credit you next time. Next
all
time.
right,
I'm going to use
cool.
it, but I'm not crediting you.
That's okay. All right. So, but I'm crediting both of you for being on this episode of Frank About Health. And that being said, we will be back in a few. Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on TalkRadio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Ready to serve up success with a splash? Hi, I'm Bruce Kramer, a.k.a. the Corporate Cockroach.
I'm the Renaissance woman, Angie Snowball.
And I'm your strategy doctor, Dr. Navtej Desange, inviting you to serving up success with a splash.
Join us as we shake things up with real talk and real strategies centered around awareness, action, and accountability.
And yes, there really is a cocktail involved. Please join us and sip your way to success.
Serving up success with a splash, where wisdom meets happy hours. Cheers!
Cheers!
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. Well, overall, I think, Mark, like what I was saying, we had done our own little draft of what we were going to talk about today, but I think our organic way of talking about it was exactly what was deserved because, if anything, I felt like I learned a lot more than I knew an hour ago. So I appreciate that. And then, David, thank you again for bringing Mark from our old days at tech to Frank About Health because I now know that like what the title of this segment is about, the future is in our hands. And I wanted basically to spend the remaining, I think it's 5 minutes of the show, to pretty much take what we've discussed today, knowing that healthcare disruption is a constant, not a variable, but that the entrepreneurial mind needs to look at it as opportunity and not a threat, even though the media likes to make everything threatening just for show and tell. But that being said, if we at least own our future, whether it's with a condition or without, if we want to be an advocate or engage in preventative care, or if we want to create an incubator of our own, whether in my case it's a healthcare podcast and all health related media, or if it is in David's case, a new medical technology like the way your company worked on CRISPR. I think the thing that I would like to find out from you, Mark, before we go is can you tell me what you have done in your career in terms of healthcare innovations? I know it's health tech, but were they mainly centered around illnesses or were they centered around technology devices or even something other than we've spoken about today?
Yeah, so I've co-founded two ventures myself. One was a nuclear imaging company that's now back in the lab. And the other was a home tech company to try to keep the elderly safe at home for longer. So both were around pretty specific problems, but I will say that my long-term aspiration, personally and for all of us, is to is to shift away from treatment and move towards prevention to the extent that we can. Certain diseases and conditions are hereditary, or they are really beyond our control through trauma or what have you. But there are many chronic diseases that can be significantly reduced, if not eliminated, maybe not eliminated, but reduced, right, by changing what we as individuals do. And my sort of big frustration being part of the innovation and translation ecosystem is that we are not focused enough on prevention, and too much on therapy. And I'm really looking to AI to be able to help inform patients at a population level and at an individual level, so that we are empowered as people to make better choices. So I would say that we my personal involvement in it has always been problem solve the
And touching on that, Marshall Runge's book on the great healthcare disruption talks about the latest miracle drug that really might be a miracle drug, which is these GLP drugs to help reduce weight, because of all the comorbidities associated with obesity, high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So focusing on preventive, healthy lifestyle means that you need the therapies, obviously, because this isn't going to help everyone, but it minimizes the need for therapies as you get older. These chronic illnesses that could be prevented by simple things.
That being said, would you say that if we got to that point where we mainly are all focused on preventative, the way that both you and David just outlined, with things like the GLP-1 drugs, would we then therefore be a society or a medical ecosystem where the main ongoing treatments are in the areas of mental and neurological health? Because those are things that are not containable, especially when it's not a tangible illness. Epilepsy is about electricity. It's not about a tumor, but that's just my own personal influence.
So
what you know better.
So I am the brain is like the ocean, sort of just a mystery, right? And the biology in the body is just so insanely complicated, particularly looking at it from a little mechanical engineer's perspective. I'm not a scientist. I don't even play one on TV. That I really, at the risk of jumping on the AI bandwagon, I'm really hoping that large data sites can help us with some transformational and profound insights that will allow us to understand mechanisms of action, particularly around things that are not like a physical tumor, but they are electrical pathways. And that these models will enable us to associate in ways that we can't now. Like, the electrical pathway is actually affected by this particular protein under these circumstances, or what have you, right? Where we're not really able to understand the mechanism of action entirely. But mental health, loneliness, depression, anxiety, these things are on the rise. I'm also hoping that we can, as a society, learn to utilize this thing and social
Frank about health
better.
to learn
Thank you. I appreciate
Frank
that.
about health. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, if anything, not just Frank about health, but our alliance at Brooklyn Tech, even though I'm class of 85 and you both are 84, you and I, David, have an alliance on the STEM committee that we're still involved with. And I figure it has shown me, we all graduate from college or graduate school or med school, law school, whatever, business school, whatever it is. And we all think that that is our career, alma mater. I would have to say I agree. And in the case of healthcare innovation that we've been discussing about, I really think that for the three of us, it began at Brooklyn Tech. I really believe that.
Oh, absolutely. Love for chemistry happened right there.
Yes, exactly.
Organic, inorganic, qual, and quant.
That's right.
Definition.
I'm just remembering AP Physics, AP Bio, Calculus, computer programming. I mean, I actually think that is what triggered my epileptic seizure. So maybe that was the opportunity in disguise.
You know, kind of, although these subjects are all important, I think it's having the discipline to sit through it and to grind through it. A lot of people think that these are, well, you just have to be smart and you can do it. But, you have to be enthusiastic, but you also have to be patient, and you have to grind through a lot of this stuff.
Yes.
I mean, physics, I liked physics, but it wasn't something that I woke up and I was like, wow, I want to do this. But but the grinding, the discipline to go through that, I think, many of the high achievers, many of the entrepreneurs, that's part of their personality, that they will be as enthusiastic about the messy, boring stuff as they are with the cool stuff.
It became part of our toolkit.
Yeah.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I am sorry we are signing off in about less than a minute. I want to thank Mark Filerman and David Yang for being on this very important episode of Frank About Health. You have seen over the last 5-6 weeks that I have been on a campaign for going through the disruption that we are seeing in our society as well as in technology. And I'm trying to use this as the positive direction that we have to all go forward with. So that being said, as Mark suggested, stay tuned next week to a new episode of Frank About Health. Or even as David, you were saying, it was a very informative tool for all of us to really continue following up on. I also want to point out at 6 o'clock, Success with a Splash is going to be coming on. And I just want all of you out there to please ask me or David or Mark any questions, because when this show gets replayed on YouTube, you can reach out to all of us. I'm Frank R. Harrison1@gmail.com. Mark, where can they reach you?
Yes, MC Filerman at gmail.com.
And David?
David L. Yang at iCloud.com.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we are signing off right now. Stay tuned for Success with a Splash. Thank you to Jesse behind the scenes, and thank you again for being here. See you next week.